So let's start by unboxing what humility really means when you're evaluating a candidate.
Pamela, humility in the corporate and leadership context has a slightly different meaning.
So, from an executive search lens, why has humility become such a critical leadership trait today more than it was a decade ago?
Talk about technology, everybody knows it's changing at breakneck speed. Talk about regulatory updates, people psychologies, everything is changing at a very, very fast pace.
What are the subtle signals that you really look for that tell you a leader genuinely embodies humility?
One of the first things that I try to observe is how well the person is listening.
Most leadership advice sounds good, but very little of it is real. Real leadership, as per me, isn't learned from a playbook. I learned it from mistakes that I made in my work. I learned it from the wrong decisions that I took. I learned it in moments which nobody ever prepared me for. Leadership Unboxed strips leadership down to a level that it really matters. How leaders are assessed, how potential is evaluated, how leaders who will follow growth versus stagnate are separated. The lot that does it, the executive search professionals. Very critical component in the whole hiring process. If you want to really lead with intention and not just with time, you have arrived at the right place, because we are going to discuss with leadership recruiting professionals about their executive search initiatives on various topics like humility, like executive presence, like the hiring traits they look for, how to really work on your resume, and a whole lot of different things that will come extremely handy when you start preparing for the next big change in your career. Welcome to Leadership Unboxed. Thank you, Sandeep, for taking this opportunity with me, talking to our audience about Leadership Unboxed theme on humility. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pamela, for having me. It's a privilege.
Yeah. So, Sandeep, we typically start with a little bit about the guest. So, it's important for people to put you in perspective. If you could tell a little bit about yourself so that people know what you do, and then we dive into the topic and go deeper.
All right. By education, I completed an MBA in marketing. But what I'm currently doing for the last 1 decade, in fact, is got nothing to do with marketing. I am an HR professional now, helping people hire the best possible talent across geographies and across sectors. I'm an research professional.
So thank you, Sandeep, for telling us a little bit about yourself and giving us that perspective of where you come from. So Sandeep, as leaders grow in seniority, they gain visibility, authority, and influence. What often gets tested along the way is humility, not as a value, but as a leadership trait or a capability. So let's start by unboxing what humility really means when you're evaluating a candidate.
Pamela, humility in the corporate and leadership context has a slightly different meaning than the modesty meaning that we are used to in everyday life. At senior levels in corporate hierarchy, for me, the biggest sign that someone is a humble leader is if the person is as comfortable talking about what he does not know as much as he or she is talking about what he knows. Just because you have authority does not mean you should know everything. A true leader understands and accepts that. Let me explain this with a real life example. I'm currently working on 2 senior level positions for my clients. One is a head of finance, which is a CFO role, and the other is a head of HR role. Now, both of these functions need very good knowledge of their respective fields. Both are pretty wide fields, have a lot, both subjects encompass. Finance has aspects like accounting, taxation, audit, treasury management, etc. Whereas HR encompasses recruitment, comp and ben, performance management, etc., etc. But can anybody be excellent at everything? The answer is no. Some people are good in one subject, the others might be good in something else. So in one of the conversations that I was having with one of my candidates for the head of finance role, I asked him how good he is with taxation. He immediately replied saying, see, while I have handled indirect tax in my previous job, I have never really had an opportunity to do much of direct tax. So then my natural next question to him was, how will he handle direct taxes in the CFO role if he is selected for the role? How will he fill up this gap? He immediately had an answer for me. I mean, he said that in case he gets selected for this role, he'll make sure that he has a direct tax person in his team who is good with the subject. That single statement told me more about his leadership maturity and humility than any achievement that his CV would have told me. These small bits during a conversation that I have with my candidates are windows to the personality of the candidate and more specifically their humility traits.
So what I understood is humility is more filtered and found out or observed in conversations. It is not a direct attribute or a metric available on a resume. So from an executive search lens, why has humility become such a critical leadership trait today more than it was a decade ago? Nobody was talking about humility 10 years back, but today it's like a very hot topic.
Think about what has changed in the last decade. A lot has changed. The
Correct.
speed at which things are changing is extremely high today. Talk about technology, everybody knows it's changing at breakneck speed. Talk about regulatory updates, people psychologies, everything is changing at a very, very fast pace. What was prevalent, what was important 20 years back is probably defunct now. It's not relevant at all. As a human being, there is a limit to which you can keep yourself updated. You will never have all the answers. This is where humility and its increased importance in today's world comes in. If you're not humble enough to plead ignorance and ask your team member who might be better equipped than you in a certain situation, you are then signing up for failure. Which is why, as a recruitment and executive search professional, I need to pay very high attention to assess this quality in my candidates while doing leadership hiring. While some clients will tell me directly, please pay attention to this aspect, please get me people who are humble. The fact is that most clients won't, because the focus is so much more towards other aspects like academic degrees, past professional success, what have they achieved, what in the previous job or the job prior to that. Humility takes a back seat. But irrespective of whether my client tells me or not, I will always have it at the back of my mind to assess this very important quality while I'm evaluating the candidates. Any leadership position in any field, humility becomes important. When the hired people then do well in their roles, the people who asked me to do the search will remember that, okay, so and so was recruited through me. So it's upon me to give them the best possible candidates for the roles that I'm hiring for. So
what I'm hearing is humility has actually been your differentiator. So if you assess people on humility, you have been able to produce better quality candidates because they go and deliver with a lot of humble behavior, which is a very key trait in actually delivering in a C-suite role. And in my personal experience, I have noticed humility is often visible in how key leaders, they describe success not in who they are, or I am humble, being very explicit, right? So how they actually approach learning, how they actually fill gaps. To your example about the CFO, right? The candidate that you were talking to. What you don't know and how are you approaching to learning that is a metric or a key indicator of how leaders are practicing humility. Now let's go a little more deeper into the subject. When you are in your early conversations assessing a potential candidate, in a conversation about what are the subtle signals that you really look for that tell you a leader genuinely embodies humility, apart from what you just mentioned, right? It can be a self-rehearsed, self-aware attribute that they would have prepared for interviews, or there are some subtle signals which are not explicitly asked, but you are observing beyond what you just mentioned in the CFO hiring piece. So what I do is during my preliminary discussion, one of the first things that I try to observe is how well the person is listening. I feel listening skills have a very direct connection with being a humble leader. Leaders who come from a position of power, authority, would usually not be great listeners. They would cut you in between, or sometimes would just be waiting for you to finish your sentence and then start answering. The answer would be already there in their head. Sometimes they would cut you in between to make their point and would keep interrupting you. There is a high chance that if they are not listening to me when I am talking, they would not be great listeners when their team members are talking to them. Poor listeners, I feel, very seldom make successful leaders. One more thing that I try to observe is the kind of questions they ask me. I'm not the hiring company. They know that. I'm an external consultant to them. I'm the mediator between the hiring company and them. So the guard is down. The conversation is more unfiltered. It's more raw. If money is the most important thing for them while they're changing their job, they'll ask me, what is your client's budget? What is the hike that you think I'll be able to get? While I acknowledge the fact that money is important to today's world, but these questions in the initial part of the conversation are red flags for me. This clearly shows that money is the most important thing for that person. That to me is not the best candidate. It's unlikely that I would recommend that candidate to my clients for leadership roles, even if this candidate has done really well in their career so far. You know something? Some leaders, like how I assess humility when I am on the other side, right? Like suppose I'm applying for a job or I'm changing teams and I'm trying to work for a new leader. I assess humility by trying to ask them a little bit about what they personally got wrong. Because I've often observed that some leaders speak very confidently about teams. Okay, this initiative, I did this, the team went wrong here, this is how I fix things. But when you really narrow it down to what they struggle as an individual and they're unable to speak about it, that also tells me that they're not very humble or they're not practicing humility actively, because they have a challenge really talking about their own failures. And now let's progress the conversation a little bit onto a scale, right? Across leadership transitions that you have observed, because I'm sure you're privy to a lot of transitions, people working in a company with a certain budget and a certain role, moving into the next higher role or a parallel move. So these transitions, when you're observing, where does humility make the biggest difference in whether someone successfully scales into a larger role, like a finance controller being hired into a CFO role, or a head of HR for a certain geography being elevated to a global HR head? Does humility really be a big differentiator there?
For me, here the difference is the way the person thinks. People who have a large thinking canvas can scale into larger roles. If a person thinks more about his own performance or her own performance and not so much about the organization, their growth is bound to be limited. This is where humility comes in. A humble leader is comfortable not being in the limelight when there is success, when success happens. I'll give you an example from the world of sport, the world of the most popular sport in our country, cricket. Everybody knows who is MS Dhoni, arguably one of the greatest leaders, not just in Indian cricket, but perhaps world cricket. He won multiple trophies for India as well as his IPL side, CSK. After the trophy is handed over to the captain, there is a customary team photo session. Now, during this photo session, Dhoni would always hand over the cup to one of the junior cricketers in his team and then quietly go to the side to take pictures. As a captain, he always had complete right to be in the center and be the most visible, enjoy the complete limelight. Look at pictures from England's World Cup win in 2019. Their captain, Eoin Morgan, was a great captain. I mean, he led them really well. But if you see World Cup pictures, World Cup victory pictures of England with the team with the cup in hand, you will see Eoin Morgan right in the center, often holding the cup himself. But then look at Dhoni's World Cup victory pictures, look at Dhoni's Champions Trophy pictures, look at his IPL pictures. He would most probably be at the side with one of his junior team members holding the cup at the center. This is, for me, is being humble and being a great leader.
So, when you're assessing people, do you see this more clearly during phases when they describe their growth or during moments of pressure?
Definitely during moments of pressure. During good times, all leaders are at their best, smiling, relaxed, enjoying their moment of glory. But it is during difficult times, be it a big tournament loss in cricket or a big difficult business year. This is when the real test of character happens. Humble leaders take responsibility. They become the face of the team during the tough times. During good times, they let the team enjoy the glory of success.
Yeah. You remind me of one of the leaders, sales leader that I worked for. So I happened to ask him, he finished 6 months in the company, and I asked him, how are you feeling about the new job? I feel that your APAC leader whom you report into is very happy about what you're doing. So he said, look, I'm in my best form right now. I'm delivering numbers, but my chips will be down in some quarter. So sales is a quarterly game. So when that happens, I'm yet to see how he conducts himself and how he treats me. Because when things are not good, I would look for his support more than I'm looking for it now. So that's an indicator for me. And that kind of stuck to me. Whatever you just said reminded me of that story. And I've seen a lot of strong leaders stall not because of capability gaps, but because curiosity quietly disappeared and they wanted to be just taking the credit of the great work that the entire team does. Now, we did speak a little bit about the red flags. You mentioned somebody asking about budget of the role in the beginning of the conversation, when they could have really asked many other right questions to validate the role and their fit better. But other than that, what are some of the early red flags that suggest a leader may struggle with humility once in power? Even if their track record looks exceptional, they're giving you all the right examples, but something that you have in your back pocket that you use as a framework or an indicator of struggle that you may see, if you deploy this person, he may really struggle with humility.
It's extremely common for people to write about their success stories on their resumes. And by all means, they should do that. Resumes are to project what you are best at, what have been your accomplishments in life, in your professional life, what all have you done. You want to tell people about it. And there's absolutely no problem in that. But when I ask a certain candidate to elaborate on their success story, I quietly observe who they are attributing their success to. Is the answer all about, I did this, I did that, this is how I turned it around, how I faced a difficult situation, but I came out triumphant? Or are they also mentioning the contributors who behind the scenes have also done some little bit to their success, contributed to their success? Now, I ask them then about their failures. And then I observe the same thing. I observe what they say about their failures. Are they owning up or are they giving reasons which are completely external to them? The board did not approve things on time. The environment changed. The pandemic happened. Very little ownership. These are clear giveaways of a not so humble leader. This person will probably struggle whenever the going gets tough.
At senior levels, I feel if leader starts defending themselves too much and they are very defensive, they ultimately lead and become an arrogant person. And that is very difficult to gauge in an interview. But there are examples that you can really use from their stories to identify. And that kind of, again, leads to a complete lack of humility in the way they conduct themselves. We were talking all along about how you assess candidates based on job description or the role that you're hiring for. Now, from your experience, how well do boards and founders really evaluate humility during senior hires? Because you would have received this mandate from an organization, right? So, what do they typically do to tell you that humility is important? Or unpack this a little bit for us, because we don't get to talk to people who give you the mandate.
It is very, very difficult to evaluate this quality, the quality of humility during an interview. Think about the founders or the CEOs, whoever is doing the interview. There are so many things that that person has to assess in that limited time that he or she has. There are so many things that founders and CEOs have in mind while interviewing senior executives for their organizations. What is the education like? What is the employment history like? What have been their achievements? So many things which are perhaps more important, at least at that point of time, have to be evaluated in that short period. Now, very often humility gets deprioritized in this evaluation process. Now, what is the risk if this happens, if humility takes the back seat during the evaluation process? I feel non-humble senior executives are unlikely to become great leaders. The effects will show up slowly but surely. It is likely to create an environment of an unhappy team, which will probably lead to high attrition, poor performances, and perhaps many other side effects.
Absolutely. Totally with you. In fact, I have had situations where leaders have changed every 6 months, and not because they were not delivering their numbers, but there was absolute lack of humility in the way they conducted themselves in day-to-day life, leading into forecast calls. And of course, you have to be objective, but you cannot rip people of their basic dignity, right? And when that happened, it was so visible within 6 months that they were delivering results, but at the cost of people getting burned out or leaving. As you said, high attrition, a lot of dissatisfaction among employees. And that was completely going against the DNA and the top values the company followed. So it was a disaster, and it did impact business in medium and long term. Now, we discussed the definition of humility. We looked for what are the subtle traits you look for. We discussed a little bit about what's the opportunity cost of not having humility in a profile. As we close, I thought it'll be really nice to ask you to complete a sentence. I've never done this before with any of my guests, but if humility became a leadership advantage, what would it be like? If you can complete that sentence for me.
I feel humility becomes a leadership advantage when the leader is confident enough to aim for the smartest team and not being the smartest in the team. This shift in thinking will automatically improve the quality of the team the leader is trying to build, will encourage people to speak up their mind, leading to better ideas and eventually better success of the whole team.
That's a beautiful way of completing the sentence and closing this conversation. Thank you so much for sparing this time, sharing your valuable insights for the audience. If leadership is a long game that you wish to play, humility may be a very, very critical trait that determines not just how far you can go as a leader, but how many people will choose to follow you. And leadership is all about having the right set of people and leading with the people and delivering results. Thank you so much. If this conversation made you pause, even briefly, then it did its job. Leadership isn't built through answers alone. It's built through better questions practiced over time. If you would like more conversations like this, subscribe to the channel. And if there's a question you're wrestling with right now, leave it in the comments. That's often where the next conversation begins.